here we go, look. Final Fantasy VII. Everyone's favourite. It's the best Final Fantasy, isn't it? 7. Well, I think it is anyway. I don't know about you. You'd probably say 6, I bet. Or 10? Either way, it certainly is admired. Enough to get its own movie, and a bunch of poor to very okay spin-offs. And a full-blown ruddy remake. Or Final Fantasy IX, that's a good one. So you probably all know why 7 is so revered by now, but just in case you don't, here's a recap, just really quickly. So, the PlayStation comes out in the 90s. It's got black CDs and it's more powerful than God. Video games are cool now, more adult. Come back from the pub, play Tekken. Bruce Lee. Come back from the club, play Wipeout. Weird Ad Alien Girl. Ridge Race. Lara Croft in Tomb Raiders. She's got triangular tits and you can lock the butler in the fridge. And Final Fantasy VII. Epic story, amazing music, snowboarding, motorcycling, arm wrestling, tons of cool characters, big world, gorgeous pre-rendered backgrounds, computer-generated full-motion video, there's a swear word in there, I think. It's got a bad guy and he's all mysterious. You don't see him for ages, but you keep hearing about him, and then finally you do see him and he's massively OP, and then he walks into the fire like a badass. And it's got Midgar, the best video game location ever. Oh, the symbolism, Susan, the symbolism. You're Susan, by the way. And now all that stuff is back in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it's bigger and it's flashier and it's more detailed than ever. But is that really a good thing, Susan? What am I talking about? Well, the most striking and obvious thing about the Final Fantasy VII Remake is the visuals, and the massive chasm in graphical fidelity between the original and the remake. But now, what I found interesting with this shift to greater realism in the looks department is that certain pre-existing inconsistencies in the world of Final Fantasy VII have been greatly emphasised. I'm wondering, do the 4K graphics and realism of the remake really benefit the pre-established world and its themes? Or does the chief attribute of this version, the massively improved visuals, in some cases just serve to emphasise some aspects of the world that themselves are unclear or unexplained? Before I show you what I mean, let me just say up front that I'm a huge fan of the original, but I can still recognise that it's not without flaws. So I was looking forward to the remake with the hope that it would tidy up some stuff. That's one of the reasons I like remakes and remasters in general. Now, there's various ways remakes have been handled in the past, and with varying degrees of care and attention to detail. But what's interesting about Final Fantasy VII Remake is that it's almost unlike every other remake due to the fact that it's been fully rebuilt and reimagined. And it's not just the visuals that have been completely remade, but the narrative itself has been reworked, rewritten, and fully voiced. Furthermore, it's only the first 8 hours of the original story, stretched out to a 30+ hour game. Singular? And bless my hole if it isn't pretty good. The gameplay is so satisfying, I loved the battle system. There was a great differentiation between the characters and how they each felt in battle. The music was amazing, one of the best soundtracks in recent memory. The voice acting was great, I loved the cast, I thought they did a great job. And there were some wonderful moments in the game and some sweet nods to the original, which were very enjoyable and greatly appreciated. And actually, the whole thing was a pretty faithful recreation. And that's pretty much everything anyone could have hoped for, right? But on the flop side, you could argue that the new stuff didn't really add anything to the story in any meaningful way. The side quests were a bit fetchy, and Midgar had too many narrow corridors and wasn't open enough. And you could even say the major story beats play out much worse than in the original. I mean, this bombshell of a scene was really crying out for this guy, wasn't it? And maybe the less we say about the final chapter, the better? And had we all known when that first teaser trailer dropped that Sephiroth would be popping up every which way in this game, and at the end you'd actually have to fight him at the edge of the universe, we probably would have given up hope of this game being anywhere near as good as it actually was, right? And I don't know how you feel about the whole rebirth, retcon, revengeance nature of where this new trilogy is headed, and what looks like is going to be a big departure from the original narrative, but maybe this video will make you feel a bit better about that when I point out how wonky the faithful version is. So, generally, I can put up with a lot of nonsense in video games, like constant anime grunting, or various wet blankets like Chadley, Kyrie,
What?
Leslie, or even Yuffie. How many times does she want to say, I got this?
You got this, Yuffie. We got this. You got this. We got this.
Got what? The situation under control? A handle on your life? Because I don't think you have, love. Can't even do shorts up properly. Oh, whatever. Heck, I even like Roche. Absolute legend. Because I try to enter into the intended spirit of a game as much as possible. Because when a jerk looks into a video game, a jerk looks back. So none of that stuff really got my bum up as much as, well, the graphics, really. And I know that sounds weird because aside from a few dodgy door textures here and there, the graphics are actually amazing. But while playing, I feel like, due to its realistic reinterpretation, Remakes Midgar begged certain questions that the original Midgar did not. The world of the remake almost draws too much attention to itself, and it can't handle the scrutiny. And so that's what I'm going to do in this video, is explore the idea that the enhanced graphics of this remake have helped nudge the pre-existing world of Final Fantasy VII into incoherence and expose contradictions in some of its themes. For example, let's look at the opening sequence of the original. Cloud, Barrett and 3 friends blow up a power station, and after a brief tussle in the street with a small security detail, stow away in a freight cart of a mostly empty passenger train and escape to their hideout in the slums. Now again in 4K for the remake. A beautiful and muscular Aryan man with the world's most recognisable haircut and a massive man mountain with a cannon for an arm, Charlie Sheen, Badger and Breastplate break into a power station without disguises, running past security cameras, hooting and hollering every which way.
You got this.
They blow the thing up, destroy half the town, Pretty Boy crashes an entire squadron of Shinra soldiers in the street, and then they make their escape by catching the last train home, where they threaten some innocent employees of said power station before disembarking and loudly celebrating their act of terrorism in front of a large crowd.
Hot damn, we are good!
Yes!
Feels a bit strange, doesn't it? Even though the chain of events is pretty much the same, the absurdity is heightened because it looks so realistic. In the original, the visuals were rudimentary, so I feel like it was able to take certain liberties with certain scenes and set pieces and get away with it. But I guess when you scale up the detail, you scale up the imperfections as well. As Uncle Ben probably once said, with great graphics comes great incomprehensibility. So let's talk about Midgar. One of the themes early on in Final Fantasy VII, and one of the things that is often lauded about Midgar, is that it's a strong visual metaphor for class divide and social inequality. So, Midgar is a great steel city on a segmented disc, floating 300 metres above ground level. Midgar is the creation and base of the Shinra Electric Power Company. Its 8 life force-sucking reactors encircle the city, while its monolithic headquarters towers over all from the centre. Meanwhile, a bunch of poor people live in slums underneath it. As to why this is, well, I don't know. Is it important? Well, yeah, I reckon. I think it's important to establish the lore and background of any fictional universe, so that the characters who dwell within it all behave in a consistent manner. Did the people of the slums always live there, and then suddenly Midgar was built on top of them, disrupting their agricultural way of life, and making their once quaint idyllic towns dumping grounds for the wealthy elite above? Or did Shinra build Midgar and then allow the poor people of the world to take refuge beneath its metal plate, providing them with shelter, protection, energy and artificial light, and built railways to give them access to jobs and opportunities on the surface? Which is it? Because either scenario paints Shinra in a very different light. Do the residents find the metal ceiling oppressive, or do they see the plate as something aspirational, a goal to work towards, to one day live upon it along with all the other affluent people? Maybe it's all of the above. I don't know any of this because the game doesn't make it clear. Now, you could ask all these questions of the original too, of course. Maybe I didn't at the time because I wasn't so much of a cynical arsehead as I am right now, or maybe I was just too dumb to notice. But I think it's the noticing part that's the key here. When the remake plonks you down on the ground floor of the slums and lets you pan around the camera in full 3D, it's going to come up against a much higher level of scrutiny than the low-fidelity backgrounds of the original ever did. It's the sheer scale and level of detail that draws out certain questions from the player. Don't get me wrong, Midgar looks cool, it's a fascinating location, and maybe if you were just passing through you'd think, wow, cool city. But if you're going to make the poor people who live under it the focus of your story, you should maybe explain how they got there. I feel like Remake was a little light on necessary lore, the kind that establishes logic within the world and makes it more believable basically. But as it is, the lore is unclear and it left me wondering. Look at Resident Evil 2 Remake. Yeah, it didn't have an epic cinematic story to retell like Final Fantasy VII, so it maintained the same schlocky B-movie, let's get the flip out of Zombie Town storyline from the original, which is brilliant. However, it did take a few steps to improve its environmental storytelling. The main thing, it added toilets to the police station, an omission from the original that made it virtually unplayable. But secondly, it added a note in the form of the guide pamphlet, which states that the police station used to be an art museum. This is a great little touch. It subtly explains why the police station's layout is completely mental, why there's a clock tower, statues, weird attics, and other such things usually associated with video game puzzles, and it just allows the player to concentrate on the actual themes of the game and not be distracted by confusion. Would it really have been so hard for Square to have done something similar to explain why Midgar is floating in the air, with the riches on top and the povos underneath? For example, you could have Jessie explain to Cloud how Mako energy is so hard to extract from the Earth that the only way to do it is with really tall reactors, like giant oil derrick pumps or something. She could say something like,
"Those Shinra creeps knew the reactors would be so tall, they'd overshadow everything and make the Earth all hella dry and crispy for miles. But they big fat built them anyway."
And then Cloud could go, You still get to keep the very direct symbolism of the city's structure, the social elite on top and the poor downtrodden on the bottom, and a little bit of context isn't going to shatter the metaphor, is it? You wouldn't be over-explaining to dole out this information. Maybe it doesn't matter to you, Susan, but I'd like to know. I mean, it's not like I'm asking a dumb video game logic question like, where does Doom Guy keep all his guns, or what did Timmy and Tommy do with all the fish they buy? I'm not even asking how do bullets work in this world, because actually I'd really like to know, because somehow fancy golden pistol beats arm cannon. It would enrich the story. It establishes the scene and has a bearing on upcoming events. It creates depth to the world and enhances immersion. These are supposed to be oppressed people, and now in the remake they're everywhere and they're all jabbering away. You don't think it'd be a good idea to explain how they came to be living under a giant rotting pizza? It might help motivate me in wanting to liberate them by taking down the evil corporation that put it there. But shit, most of these people don't even seem to care. This guy even admires it.
Look at all that steel work. You trying to tell me that's not progress?
I can understand a bit of community spirit and rallying round in trying times, but there doesn't really seem to be much hatred for Shinra at all. They're all just hanging out, eating Korean barbecue plate from hipster food trucks, with barely even a cross word about Shinra. Fuck me, even Cloud sticks up for Shinra every now and then. When the scared guy says,
Shinra bitches get what they deserve.
Cloud gets all defensive.
Now hold on.
Anyway,
It's like, what? Shinra doesn't deserve this? Why not? Get your fucking story straight. It's so inconsistent, and that makes me confused. And when I'm confused, I'm distracted, and I'm no longer immersed in the events unfolding in the story because I'm too busy trying to figure out why the piss everything is so weird. I have to make my own assumptions, and I hate having to write my own story in my head. Must be how modern Star Wars fans feel. And then take Aeries' house, for example. Why is it so lovely? It was noticeably more lovely than the rest of Sector 6 in the original, that's true, but now it's like Barbie's frickin' dream house by comparison. How did Elmira manage to secure such prime secluded real estate? Oh, was it a gift from Shinra in order to keep young Aeries safe and comfortable until they needed her again? Nah, look, you can see it's the same house before Shinra even find her. So how's Midgar's rich-poor divide holding up now? If you're rich, you live on top and get the sky, but if you're poor, you live in the dirty junkyard under perpetual shadow? Unless you're Elmira and then you get a nice riverside cottage with waterfall views. I mean, Christ, even in the real world, property like this is incredibly unrealistic, especially if you're a first-time buyer, no chance. I think there's actually an argument here in favour of a deviation from the original source material. When the remake's realistic visual style accentuates the quaint and charming appearances of Aeries' house, it further emphasises the dissonance between her house and the rest of the houses in Midgar. Why couldn't it have been a tin shack like everyone else? You could have Elmira say something like, I knew Aeries was special. When she showed up, everything changed. She made this old tin can I live in look like a million gil. The grass began to grow back and the flowers bloomed, and that old pipe that used to dump waste coolant down from the reactor, it just suddenly turned into sparkling Evian. And then the little fish appeared in the stream. Aren't they cute? I call that one Mr. Turbo Fins. And then Cloud could go, uh-oh. And if that's too much expository dialogue for you, then just show it. Let's see the house looking barren in the flashback before Aeries arrives, and then all green and lush after. And as a bonus, it'd actually be really great to get a glimpse of what makes Aeries special. And don't you think clearly seeing some kind of visual representation of her special connection to the planet would be a better way to exhibit her power than her playing hide and seek with a spooky sackboy or whatever? Yeah, I suppose you could argue that it's always been implied Aeries makes the flowers grow, but this is a massive remake with big flashy detail and embellishment. Why isn't it going on the stuff that matters? I really love this game, by the way. But now I need a drink. Let's go to the bar. Now, in the original, Tifa's bar is one of about 4 buildings that make up Sector 7. It's a haphazard 3-story structure of metal, timber and brick. There's fuse boxes, cables, and old signage that says Texas for some reason. But aside from the decking, it doesn't look much like a bar. It looks like every other structure in the slums. Makeshift, repurposed, improvised. Getting by and making do, that's the motto in the Midgar slums, probably. But the 7th Heaven in the remake, well, now that's a swanky establishment. It's got hardwood floors, comfortable seating indoors and out, games, the heaviest draft beer, the most suggestive cocktails, fine English cuisine. You'd pay £10 a pint in a place like that in London. I mean, this is the Yellow Jack Inn, a bar in Blaine County, just outside Los Santos. Sure, not the most desirable location in GTA 5, but it is inspired by actual real-world locations in the counties surrounding Los Angeles, not slums. The 7th Heaven looks almost palatial in comparison.
Hey, you're banned!
So how on earth did Tifa manage to acquire such an establishment? Come to Midgar, work hard, and in 5 years you could own your own pub. Again, it doesn't really tally with the idea of Midgar being this place of great social division and oppression. Wait, is that a Shinra manager? Why does a Shinra executive live down here in the mucky muck with the slum bums, while Jesse's dad, a former blue-collar Mako storage employee, just gets to kick back all day up on the plate? Where's this social divide everyone keeps talking about? Seems a bit all over the place if you ask me. You see what I mean though? All this extra detail doesn't seem to elevate the original material, but instead it just drags it down. So anyway, Tifa has a bar because she just does. Fine, she built it herself. I can accept that. But what about this? Maybe Sector 7 was a very dangerous place before Tifa arrived. The bar was run by Don Corneo's men, and they were doing nasty organised crime things, and the residents of Sector 7 were terrified. Then one day, Tifa met Barrett, and they teamed up to whoop some butt and kick Corneo's men to the curb. The bar was being used by Corneo's hoods as a front to sell Guysol greens, and they had a secret basement under the pinball machine where they made dream powder and skooma. So when Tifa and Barrett entirely battered Corneo's lackeys, they inherited the bar and turned it into a base of operations for their avalanche cell. The people of Sector 7 were eternally grateful to Tifa and Barrett and vowed to aid them in keeping their operations a secret from Shinra and Corneo. Then later, after the bombing of Reactor 5, when Shinra is looking for Avalanche, they use Corneo's men to shake down the residents of Sector 7. But no one talks. Frustrated, Shinra plans to drop the plate on everyone, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, wiping out Avalanche and punishing the insolent slum dwellers who concealed them. Shinra tells Corneo the plan, and the Don withdraws his men back to the safety of Sector 6. When Tifa notices Corneo's men giving up and retreating, she becomes suspicious and decides to infiltrate the Don's mansion for information. But instead of all that, all we get is this.
I heard that Wall Market's very own Don Corneo has his stooges out looking for you.
Huh?
Is that so?
And all the while, Barrett and friends remain hidden from Shinra by hiding out in the most striking building in the Sector 7 slums, that they own for reasons. You'd think all Shinra would need to do is just pop their heads into Sector 7 and maybe ask around to see if anyone has seen the massive man mountain with a gun for an arm and the beautiful pineapple with the sword the size of a shark. They'd find them in 5 minutes. Maybe they might start at the giant pub in the middle of the slums. I'm sure someone there might have seen them. Anyway, Shinra can't find them, so they just decide to drop a neighbourhood on them instead. But I know what you're going to say, Susan. Something war with Wutai. I thought it was more about stamping out Avalanche's home base.
Stamp them out, home base and all.
And creating an excuse to build a new Midgar.
Neo Midgar.
With the help of the Ancient. Whom, by the way, they haven't yet secured despite her being very important to their future plans and most likely being in the vicinity of the catastrophic destruction they're about to cause. Also, why didn't Shinra just broadcast the actual soldiers from Wutai who infiltrated their headquarters and attacked their head of weapons development? Oh, never mind. We're getting in the weeds here. Let's go to the Shinra building. Into the Dragon's Den. It's a common culmination of any good story for the heroes to end up there, in the belly of the beast. Usually though, the heroes take certain steps to look inconspicuous. Disguises, a diversion, or going in quietly around the back. Which is what Cloud and Co do. They pancake their asses against the top of a Shinra truck and infiltrate the Shinra building through the car park. And then they immediately get discovered and begin to brawl with Shinra security before even making it out of the basement.
Let's dance, asshole!
That's that.
Sure hope no one else knows we're here.
Luckily, no one notices, and they make it to reception. And then, even more lucky Leah, there's no one to notice them there either. So after a bit of monkey bars, they make it to the executive levels. The party begins to suspect a trap though, when the friendly ghost at reception doesn't question their reasons for being there, but instead invites them on a tour.
You must be here for our grand tour.
After a walk through a chamber of horrors and a quick go on a disaster simulator, we discover that it's actually the kooky mayor of Midgar who's been meddling with the surveillance system to keep our heroes undetected. Okay, great. I buy that. However, it doesn't explain how a large number of Shinra staff, still going about their business in the building, failed to notice or be alarmed by the spiky sexy dream boy strapped with the biggest piece of castle forged steel ever around, the permanently packing big brother of Terry Crews, and the world's most beautiful prostitute, all of whom exactly resemble the 3 terrorists whom just a couple of days prior broadcast themselves blowing up a power station built and operated by the company said employees currently work for. You could just say this is bad writing, and it is. But a very similar sequence of events took place in the original, and it didn't feel so silly that time. It was subtle. The detail was implied. It was late night. There were fewer staff around. The security guard on duty fell asleep. Meanwhile, you had to sneak past some other guards on active duty. If I remember correctly, you can complete the entire sequence without getting into a fight, and even then you still end up getting caught. The original got away with it, but the game of Final Fantasy VII from the PS1 doesn't translate to 4K ultra graphic settings. Some concessions need to be made. It doesn't make sense for the most conspicuous trio since the friggin' Powerpuff Girls to crash their way through the cafeteria of the Eagle's Nest and not get caught.
Better catch 'em soon.
Have them wear disguises or sneak their way through the Shinra HQ inside a cardboard box or drink a polyjuice potion that turns them into a laundry cart. Or, how about maybe have them arrive at the Shinra building in the wake of a disaster? The aftermath of some kind of horrific scenario in which all that remains are the dead bodies of the staff and a trail of blood leading to the roof. But I have no idea what could have possibly occurred in order for that to work. Never mind.
Mother.
Look, I don't want to criticise this game too harshly. I actually really loved it and I'd play it again, damn it. And I don't want to deter anyone else from playing it either. And of course it's easy for me to come up with my own little backstories when the team at Square has done all the hard work of creating such a lively world full of interesting characters. I just wanted this remake to be a bit tighter, and I just find it funny how the fidelity of the world and the characters in the remake compounds on the pre-established narrative of the original. At the same time, I find it really admirable of Square to give the fans what they wanted. I think they really wanted to stay faithful to the original as much as possible, at least in this first installment. All the padding for time aside, I think the goal was to show fans what they wanted to see. Cloud, Barrett and Tifa going around kicking ass in gorgeous 4K, because that's what we all wanted, right? And God knows what you make of this game as a first-time player with no experience of the original. Maybe I envy you. Because I imagine for most existing fans like myself, the impact of the original has left such a deep impression that it's impossible to untangle the remake from the original. So much so that the developers even anticipated this and tried to address it in the narrative of the game itself with the clever use of Dementors. I've even got a feeling that the Dementors, Whispers, aren't actually arbiters of fate enforcing the course of destiny, but instead they represent audience expectation. Anonymous apparitions that bully developers whenever they try and change things. The final boss in the remake is actually fan service. You basically have to destroy your preconceived notions of what the rest of the story is going to be before you can continue. So get this right, ages ago, right back near the start of this video, I was saying all about why this game is so beloved. Well, I think the impact it had on me was because of when I first played it. In 1997, I was in my early teens, and I hadn't seen anything like it really. Picture this, an audience of young teens, like me, finishing up playing with action figures and now starting to get into some really cool shit. Motorbikes, girls, gun arms. Well, Final Fantasy VII had them all. And it had an epic story and an interesting and eclectic cast of characters, and the locations were striking and memorable and cinematic. The character models, however, were kind of primitive. Even for the time they were quite blocky. But I actually think that these little polygonal figures were key in eliciting emotion and establishing a connection between the player and the game world and the story. They're simple and doll-like. As the primitive character models can't really express complex emotions themselves, it's up to the player to project their own emotions onto them, like a little polygonal canvas. And maybe in this way we establish a much stronger emotional connection to the characters because we're projecting ourselves onto them in the same way we did our toys perhaps. But now we're grown up and the game has grown up, and with scaled up detail, voice acting and photorealistic, fully expressive character models, that connection is removed somewhat. The game has to do all the work to get you invested. Now you're no longer role-playing as Cloud. You can't change his name to yours, you can't change the name of any of his friends, you can't insert yourself into the story in the same way anymore. You're not Cloud, you're just watching him. And that's fine, I suppose, that's how it's done these days. Dialogue boxes and no voiceover is pretty retro and not really a hallmark of most AAA blockbusters. But it's interesting to note that Bethesda has switched back to a silent protagonist for Starfield, as some fans felt that Fallout 4's fully voiced player character restricted role-playing potential. And you could say being an impressionable youth loving a game is not really a strong merit for the game itself, but I think there's something to say about implied detail. It engages your imagination more than actual detail. You could also make an argument that this Midgar is the one Square Enix wanted to make all along, but were hampered by limitations. But I can't think of many great works that were made with endless time and money and an infinite number of pixels to push around. But hey, it's Square Enix's story to tell how they want, and I think it's a really smart move on their part to try and tell a new story and to forge a new path with this trilogy. Because I think really the core of all my gripes with Remake stem from my expectations of it. I'm sure there are many fans out there like me who have been playing and thinking about Final Fantasy on and off for the past 20 years, not to mention the hype that's been surrounding the remake ever since the infamous PS3 tech demo from 2005. And so of course there's going to be preconceived ideas, thoughts and theories about what the perfect version of Final Fantasy VII should be. And it's going to be very difficult for Square to be able to meet those expectations with a faithful remake. So, I've decided I'm glad they're going in a new direction. If what's happening isn't so familiar, it'll be harder to scrutinise maybe, harder to recognise inconsistencies, and maybe with part 2 the impact of the visual upgrade will be lessened. We'll have gotten used to seeing Cloud and his friends in their new forms, and the one-to-one comparisons will be less prominent, therefore less of a distraction. Maybe we can just sit back and enjoy a new story. Wouldn't that be something? Maybe they'll tidy up all the other weirdness out there in the world of Final Fantasy VII. Like the luxurious towering golden amusement park built on top of a prison in the middle of a desert that you can only access via a cable car station in a burnt out ex-mining town. Or only being able to reach the world's largest port city on the back of a dolphin. Or is that just wishful thinking? We're in for another Nomura nonsensical nightmare, aren't we? Hey, maybe that sad thing from the original won't happen this time. I'd be up for that. Yeah, bring it on. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. So yeah, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed listening to what I had to say. I'm not sure if you'll agree with it, Susan. I'm not even sure if any of it made sense. But there you go. Thanks for staying with me, and keep loving the remake, keep loving games, and I'll catch you next time. Take care. Bye.